thoughts I want to share with you today, I've entitled, Scars Can Be Beautiful. I don't know for whom God gave me this message, but there's somebody that needs to hear this. What we're going to be doing is looking at two very different passages of the Bible, and I'm going to show you how we can connect them. Okay, the first one is going to be from an ancient book. In fact, scholars think this book, the book of Job in the Old Testament, pronounced Job, not Job as in the founder of Apple, Job, is actually written before any of the other Old Testament books. We don't know where it happened. We don't know anything about this person. We don't know that, we can't date it at all. It's like a Shakespearean drama written thousands of years before Will Shakespeare took a quill pen in hand. It's an incredible story of human experience. But then we're going to leap forward to the New Testament, and we're actually going to be looking at another great drama. This one, the drama of the final week of the life of Christ before his crucifixion and resurrection. In fact, what will occur in the Gospel of Luke chapter 22 that we're going to read in just a moment actually happened just a few hours on that fateful night before the goon squad of thugs employed by the politicians of the Jewish nation would arrest Jesus, beat him up, and then drag him off and hand him over to some other goons, Romans, who would commit the greatest travesty of justice the world has ever seen. All of this is about to happen, but we're going to look in on a little incident that occurred a couple hours before it all unfolded that has to do with a guy whose mom and dad gave him the name Simon when he was born, but he became a follower of Jesus, and Jesus gave him a nickname, Peter, the Rock. But we're going to see this Simon Peter be anything but rock-like in the account we're about to read. So let's take a look at these two passages of the Bible. First of all, the book of Job, chapter 5. Terrible things have happened to Job. Most of you know something about the story. By the time we get to chapter 5, this poor guy is crying out in pain. And this is what he says. For hardship does not spring from the soil, nor does trouble sprout from the ground. Yet man is born to trouble, as surely as sparks fly upward. And then a few verses later, his faith is nevertheless expressed in verse 17. Blessed is the one whom God corrects, so do not despise the discipline of the Almighty, for he wounds, but he also binds up. He injures, but his hands also heal. And now we fast forward to the New Testament. And as promised, we get to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 22. In this place known as the upper room, this little quiet dining room or a secret place where Jesus and his disciples were gathered, Jesus says this to our featured character. Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you, all of the disciples, as wheat. In other words, to grind you up. But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. But he, that is Simon Peter, replied, Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death. Jesus answered, in effect, oh, really? I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, that is in a few hours, you will deny 3 times that you know me. A 14-year-old girl by the name of Elizabeth Smart was kidnapped from her home in Salt Lake City at knife point one June evening in 2002. She was held as a virtual captive by a perverted man and his equally perverted partner who did terrible, abusive things to her until about 9 months later, on a tip, the police rescued her, restored her to her family, and arrested the perpetrators. It was a big news story. I don't know if any of you remember it, but at that time, 22 years ago, why, it was all over the news. The parents pleading for information about their daughter. It was on Dateline and Most Wanted, some of these shows. America was riveted by this incredible drama. Now, it actually took almost 8 years for the guilty guy and his partner to finally be convicted. He tried an insanity plea, and there were warring psychiatrists, different opinions about his mental condition and so on. Finally, he was convicted and put away for life. But boy, in the trial, this young girl was so strong and such a clear proponent of truth, and yet obviously a young woman of great faith, secure in the love of her family. She was amazing. And to this day, 22 years later, Elizabeth Smart is now married, a mother of 3 in her 30s. She is a part-time television reporter and journalist, and she is a remarkable advocate for people who have been abused or have been victims. She is remarkable. The 2 books she's written, they are inspiring. I know she has scars that I can't imagine from that terrible experience, but I've got to say that in many ways, those scars have made her more beautiful and more powerful and more impressive a person. Coincidentally, this coming February of 2025, as a part of our Bonita Christian Forum speaker series, we're going to be hosting right here on our stage a young woman by the name of Rachel Den Hollander, a world-class gymnast who was the first person to blow the whistle on that perverted doctor at Michigan State who had abused so many young athletes. And when Rachel spoke the truth, people didn't want to hear it, but she was courageous and she was confident. She is a woman of faith. She persevered in spite of a cover-up that a wealthy state university and a national sports organization and, incredibly, the FBI were all complicit in. How could the FBI cover up a terrible set of crimes? You wonder what's happened to our justice system, don't you? But nevertheless, Rachel, we're going to get to meet her. She is a beautiful person outside and inside because of what she's been through. Sure, she's had scars. But boy, she is an amazing person. Maybe because of that and her choices to heal through them. So, here's what I really want to say to you. If we could sit down together over a cup of coffee at Starbucks or in your living room. And by the way, I'm going to look at the people who are watching us online, but I would say the same thing to every one of you if I could look right in your eyes personally. As your pastor, this is what I want to say. Life wounds us. Life will wound us all. Over time, those wounds can heal. When wounds heal, they may leave scars, but those scars can make us more beautiful. That's what I want us to consider today. Now, let's go back to these two people in the Bible, and let's look at their stories. There's the story of Job. This is a good man, and terrible things happen to him. And they happen one after another in rapid succession, almost like machine gun fire. He had a total financial collapse. He lost all his kids. And then he had a terrible physical condition that caused him to live in constant pain. And this poor guy, suffering as much as any of us could ever contemplate, naturally cries out, why? What did I deserve this? You can understand his words. Man is born to trouble as surely as sparks fly upward. Wow, life is really hard. Job was, in many respects, I think, an innocent victim. And then we get to the other story. We come to our friend Peter. And Peter's wounds, unlike Job's, were self-inflicted. He made some terrible choices. Peter, we know, was kind of a proud and cocky guy. And he thought he could handle anything, and he was tough. And at his moment of greatest trial, he made a promise he couldn't keep. He failed. And the wounds he experienced are internal. You don't see any scars on his body, but internally, his pride has been destroyed, his self-confidence. He is coping with guilt. He is dealing with shame, with a feeling of having betrayed the one he loves the most. He is a broken man. But these are not the ends of the stories. Oh no. There is so much more to come. The story of Job, you know, it's been revered, and the book has been turned to for thousands of years by people who are dealing with their wounds of life, precisely because through all of his suffering, Job never lost his faith in God. He never turned his back on the Lord. He never allowed the pain of life to warp him into bitterness and hatred, but rather he clung to what he believed, even as the wounds struck him, and God was there for him. And the story, most of you know the ending, why Job received back blessings even greater than the pain he had initially received. God was there for him in an incredible way. And then we have the story of Peter. Oh yeah, he'd failed. But after his resurrection, Jesus restored him in a beautiful scene and gave him back his role to be the leader of the apostles. And what do you know? This guy whom Jesus had named the Rock, who had been such a failure, now is a different man. He indeed becomes the rock upon which the church can be built, a fearless proponent of the Christian message with absolute faith, not in himself, but in the Lord who is with him. These are two great stories. Do you see how they connect? They're from two different sources, but both of these are men who were wounded, but there was more to the story. So, what about our stories? I'm guessing in this room and through the 1,000 or more who are watching us online right now, there have been wounds. In fact, I'm guessing everybody here has either been wounded or you will at some point in life. Nobody is given a pass to skate all the way through 90 years and you never have a problem and you never have a pain and then you die peacefully in your sleep. Wow, how did you manage to do that? It's not going to happen. We should accept that there's going to be some challenge and some wound, and it'll be different for every single person. What you deal with, it will be different than what I deal with. It's ridiculous to try to compare. Well, you've had it better than I had. We all have our stuff, or we will, to deal with. When we are wounded, sometimes that wound can become infected. You know this. If you cut your skin, if you don't bandage it or you don't cover it up with some healing ointment, it might get an infection in there. The same is true of all kinds of wounds, that if we don't use the proper healing process, they can warp us, they can become toxic. But healing is there for the whole spectrum of wounds if we'll apply it. And wounds that heal can become scars. But as I said before, those scars can make us better people, can make us more sensitive to others, more able to help others, more beautiful. I can't think about wounds without having in my mind commercials I've seen for the Wounded Warriors Project and literature and ads and things online I've seen about soldiers who have been wounded in defense of our nation. There's also that organization called Tunnel to Towers that focuses primarily, though not exclusively, upon first responders who have been injured or even died in their course of action and their service. And these stories oftentimes will show people who have been very wounded. Some of them, our first reaction might be to look away because they have prosthetic limbs or they have burns that have disfigured them. Of course, in some cases, the wounds are invisible, a syndrome we call PTSD, which lives inside of their mind and their heart and needs a great deal of help to recover. These people have been wounded. But when you know the story, when you find out what they have traveled through, you realize actually how beautiful they are. Because of what they've dealt with, they have become such resilient, such powerful witnesses to healing, and we are drawn to them. By the way, do you remember the classic film Forrest Gump? Remember it? You remember the character Lieutenant Dan? Dan was in combat in Vietnam with Forrest and their unit. Terrible wound. He actually lost both of his legs. Lieutenant Dan went through a period of time where he was very depressed. Oh, what is the point of living? But through the love of Forrest and his commitment to Lieutenant Dan found a new life and a new purpose. In fact, I think it's quite fascinating that Gary Sinise, who took upon himself the role of Lieutenant Dan, in the process of living out that character, became so passionate about our veterans that he is today one of the great spokespeople for caring for and loving those who have served our country. These are wounds, but they have been turned into beautiful scars. Well, what about our experiences? Let me just summarize. Where do these wounds of life come from? How do they occur? Well, we've already seen in the Bible examples that remind us sometimes our wounds are self-inflicted. We make foolish mistakes. Some of us have been involved in toxic relationships. Some of us have made poor decisions. Some of us have become caught up in an addictive behavior and And we deal with guilt or shame or dysfunction in various ways. Others of us have suffered wounds, but we didn't actually do something to bring them on. It's life. People have done things to us that we didn't deserve, or accidents or injuries have happened, or our body has been invaded in some way. You know, these frames we live in are really very fragile. And there are so many dangers out there in the world. Cancer, of course, which is not one disease, but hundreds of them that mutate our body's own cells. There's MS and Parkinson's and dementia and ALS and spinal stenosis and atrial fibrillation. And we are fragile. We are prone to these kinds of things. So let's just think for a minute about cancer as a representative of many of these. There are in our fellowship cancer warriors who have battled this wicked disease either in your body or alongside someone you love. Fighting cancer is a tough battle. And you discover, if you become involved in it, that it is not a one-person struggle. It takes a team, not just of doctors and nurses, but of family members and friends and church to fight it together. And winning the battle with cancer doesn't necessarily mean you're cured. Because to be victorious in the battle with cancer, that's demonstrated by what's inside of you, the person you have become through that struggle. And even though sometimes cancer treatments take away your hair or leave your body looking very different, those who have fought it by faith, trusting in the Lord and relying upon the support of those they love, are beautiful and should be celebrated and affirmed, no matter what the physical looks like. There's one other common type of wound. I'll just mention this. That is the wound of losing your spouse. It may happen from divorce, a breakup of a relationship. That's painful. That causes wounds. But it also may come from the death of a spouse. Because the statistics are pretty undeniable that if you stay married, almost 50% of us will have the task of handing our loved one into the arms of Jesus. And when you lose a spouse, it feels like an amputation. It feels like half of you is cut off, and you are single again. And that causes grief. But healing can come. I have had the privilege as a pastor for 45 years of officiating at many weddings of people who have both lost spouses. And by a surprising gift from God, He has given them another partner for the final lapse of their life. And that's an amazing gift. But not everybody who has lost a spouse is called by God to enter into a new covenanted relationship. Sometimes the call from God is to find a fullness of life as a single again person. My only sister lost her husband over 10 years ago. And she went through grief, of course. She's never remarried, but I am so proud of her. And I love her so much as I see how she has invested her life as a single again person in her kids, her grandkids, her friends, the students she teaches at school, and her ministry at her church as a deacon. Her scars are undeniable, but her beauty is unquestioned. Well, we've been talking about, and we could list 1,000 other examples of how the wounds of life can become the beautiful scars. If you are wounded, if that's where you are right now, I commend to you this wonderful verse from the book of Job. He said, "For he wounds, but he also binds up." Yes, God allows us to go through these wounds, but he never leaves us. He also binds up. He injures, but his hands also heal. And so, if you're wounded, I encourage you to seek the Lord and take advantage of the healing power he brings through many ways. But finally, we have to talk about an eternal perspective. We cannot leave this. Because you see, if the Bible is right, then all the wounds we experience in this lifetime are temporary. All the pain is just, by comparison with eternity, a very short time indeed. And actually, all healing is just partial. Why? Because God has something better prepared for us. He does not intend that you and I will live on this pain-racked earth forever, but he's got something better awaiting us. That's why we trust in him. That's why, through the pain, we persevere. Would you bow your heads with me for a moment in prayer? Lord, life is what it is. A mixture of happiness and sorrow, of joy and pain. And it is for everyone. You became a man and entered into this world, and you experienced pain, all to bring us divine healing and even eternal healing. And so, O Lord, we look to you wherever we are. We lift to you our wounds and pray that you will bring us your healing and bring us your strength and work within us to make us the beautiful people you desire us to be. For we ask this in the name of our crucified and risen Savior. Amen.